Hi, everyone, and welcome. It's noontime, it's Tuesday, and it's the Maine Take. Hi, my name is Dana Connors. I am pleased to be the host of this weekly program brought to you by the Maine State Chamber of Commerce. Each week, we take a look at the initiatives, the issues, the ideas at work in our state, and the people behind those issues. Today, we're going to focus on people making a difference in our state and for our state. People who have come together, who have stayed together during those challenging moments surrounding most issues, but have worked together to provide success. And good things happen when success is a part of the answer. We're going to begin today's program with Senator Collins. We're going to follow that with discussion about the Appropriations Committee and their recent budget proposal dealing with a supplemental budget. And then I want to give a personal shout out to somebody whose last day of work is this Friday, who has been instrumental for almost 5 decades, giving us the news and reporting to us that timely information that's so important. But we begin today's program with Senator Collins. And I begin in this way to give you the context for what you are about to see. Last Thursday, the Maine State Chamber of Commerce hosted our 10th annual DC fly-in. Yes, it was virtual, but all 4 were there. They were there in person. Our 2 senators, our 2 representatives, were there with us. And during the course of that time from 8:30 to 12:30, we also had available senior representatives from the U.S. Chamber, as well as from the National Association of its Manufacturing, and an insider who gave us a look at the politics in DC. It was a fascinating morning, lots of information. But as we came to know, Senator Collins is in a very leadership role. And just before she was to take the stage at noontime, 12 o'clock, she was asked to attend a briefing with the president. She and 9 others have been instrumental in putting together an infrastructure plan, a bipartisan plan, that is, and the president wanted to be sure to have that conversation, that briefing with them. So with an apology, she left. With our blessings, she left. But even with the apology, which she did not have to extend, but she did, she offered to us the opportunity to come back on our program on Monday morning at 9 o'clock and to finish what she had started, to be able to finish and to interact with us. Again, she didn't have to do that, but she did, and we're grateful. What you are about to see is a portion, about 13 minutes, of over a half-hour interview with the senator, in which she principally speaks to the infrastructure plan, both the process, but also the product. I hope you enjoy it. I know we enjoyed bringing it to you.
First of all, Dana, let me thank you and all of your members for your understanding. I hated to have to cancel on you, particularly so much at the last moment. But as you pointed out, I have been one of the 10 negotiators, 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans, working with the administration to reach a consensus on the infrastructure package, which is so important to the state of Maine and to our nation. I also think it's important to the world to show that America can work together and that Congress can function. But it's been a very intense past 2 weeks. Prior to that, our bipartisan group had been meeting quietly, trying to work out the details in case the Republican-only group that was negotiating with the president did not come to an agreement, and they did not. So we then became more open about what we were doing in the background, going through all of these issues. And there were really three big issues. One is the scope of the package. And our 10 members felt strongly that it should focus primarily on traditional infrastructure. And by that, I mean roads, bridges, waterways, airports, seaports, water and sewer treatment plants, and broadband, rail, and transit. And that we should not be using this bill as a vehicle for a massive expansion of social programs. Some may be called for, some maybe not, but they're not infrastructure. And so we came to an agreement on that. Then we had to decide the categories and how much should be in each category. And that was the second issue. And then the third issue was, how do we pay for the package? So we met night after night, usually after our evening votes, and took turns buying dinner and meeting in the what we call hideaway rooms in the Capitol. And these are private offices that senators have. And we met with the one that was closest. And then when the press would discover us, we change our location, they'd discover us again. And although they weren't invited into the meetings because of the negotiations, every time you had to go out of the room for anything, you were met with the barrage of press. And as you know, it's hard to get to an agreement if people feel that they can't speak frankly. So once we reached an agreement amongst ourselves, 2 weeks ago, we brought in the White House negotiators. And there were 3 White House negotiators, including the Deputy Chief of Staff, Steve Ricchetti, who is a key player in this, the chairman of the Council on Economic Advisors and the head of the Legislative Affairs Office. So again, we started this session of meeting day after day, constantly, and taking turns bringing in lunch and dinner. And eventually, and it was very difficult, we reached an agreement. Then the president invited us to come brief him. In the meantime, we were briefing our respective caucuses, and we were trying to solicit other members to support our package. And so we were able to get people on both sides of the aisle. For example, we were able to get Jerry Moran and Mike Rounds on the Republican side. Angus joined us on the Democratic side. They didn't join in the negotiations, but they agreed to endorse the package, which was very helpful because we had to show the president that we had broader support than just our 10 members. So we got called to the White House on Thursday. We have a great 40-minute meeting with the president. He says that he supports it. He promises he won't try to reopen issues when the rest of his program comes up. And there is never any linkage between the two. There's never that the infrastructure package is dependent on the passage of the expansion in social programs known as the American Families Plan. So we march out to the press. The president's first words are, "We have a deal." And then each of us speaks, and we really are elated. We've worked so hard, and we believe we've come up with a good, fair package. Everybody had to give some, but we all agree that this package is good for America. $579 billion in new spending on top of the baseline. It's the most significant investment in infrastructure, some say in our history. I say since the interstate highway was built. And it really matters and can make a difference, can be a good job creator as well. Well, then I'm at the airport on Thursday night waiting for the 10:10 flight to Bangor, which gets in at about midnight. Of course, it was late, and all of a sudden, I see a New York Times article that says the president has made passage of the infrastructure bill contingent on passage of the American Families Plan, the expansion of social programs. So I instantly called the White House Chief of Staff, Deputy Chief of Staff, Mr. Ricchetti, and I tell him I'm at the airport, but this is totally different from my understanding. And then I call virtually all the other members or text them, and they've just found out too. They're calling the White House. Everybody agrees, Democrats and Republicans, that there was no linkage, that this was never discussed. So fast forward, it was an extremely busy weekend of Zoom calls, phone calls, among all of us, then separate groups of Republicans and Democrats meeting, then the whole 10 of us meeting, then all of us meeting, talking individually with the White House, and negotiating a statement where the president can still make clear that he wants his social programs passed, but that there is not linkage. He eventually walks back the statement and late on Saturday, and we appear to be back on track. But I'm still worried about Senator Schumer and Speaker Pelosi and whether they're going to allow this to go forward. I really hope it will. This really would make a difference to our state. We have a lot of bridges, for example, that need repair and replacement. We've got some PFAS contamination that would be able to be cleaned up under this bill. And it would help our seaports, our airports. It would just be good all the way around. And most important, perhaps, is it would take care of the gaps in broadband coverage that became so evident during the pandemic when there was hybrid schooling, when people were working from home, where telemedicine became so important. And I'm working right now with Swans Island, for example, to help them get internet, high-speed internet. And this bill would provide the funds to really make that happen. So it was an incredibly busy time, working literally night and day. But I do think we are back on track now on a bill that tells America that the Senate can work together on an important issue and deliver results to the American people. So why don't I stop there, because I know you have questions on that, on this and other issues, and I want to make sure that we get to them. And I'm so grateful for that question, because I think this is an absolutely key time for the business community to make clear that you support the bipartisan package. And we would be glad to provide further information through Dana to get out to the local chambers if that would be helpful, because we need you to contact all the members of the delegation to encourage people in other states to do likewise, so that we can build support. Because frankly, there are those on the far left who have already denounced the package, like Bernie Sanders that said, and Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut have said that it's paltry and it doesn't do the job and there should be huge tax increases, and that it should be linked to the other more controversial, far more controversial bill. And then we have those on the far right who just say it's too much spending, doesn't matter what it's for, and won't go for anything. So we really need the help of the business community. And to the extent that you can personalize it, it is really helpful. I was just successful last week I had a conversation with Secretary Buttigieg of the Department of Transportation, who told me, and I've advocated very strongly for this, that we've gotten funding for 14 more bridges to have their decks replaced in Maine. They're primarily in this batch is central, eastern, and northern Maine. There was an earlier batch that was the 295 corridor. And you know what a difference it's going to make to those communities. So that's an existing program, but if you can point to the need, as Kim did, for help in your area, or what would happen if a bridge were posted and what it would mean for your ability to get to work, for example, or if the road's in awful condition, or if you know of other infrastructure needs that would be met by this bill, that is all very helpful. And tying it to jobs is very helpful. If any of you represent large construction firms that would benefit, and you could point out the jobs that this would create, that would be good too. So thank you for that question.
Well, there you have it. And you have just been witness to something that money can't buy, and that is access and leadership in a way that we should be most proud and most appreciative of. And as I said at the end of that presentation, because it did go on for another 15 minutes or so, well beyond the half hour, we are so grateful for that access, for that leadership, and for that service. All the things that you have been witness to these past 13 or so minutes. Now let's turn our attention to another positive development. It had to do with what is traditionally a one-day event. It's called Veto Day. And Veto Day, as we all know, is that time that gives the legislature a chance to review the bills that the governor has vetoed. She either signs bills or she lets a bill go into being, into effect without her signature, or she vetoes it. The very purpose that's going to take place tomorrow. But as we're going to find out in a moment, it goes beyond veto. And one of those things that I really want to talk about with two members of our advocacy team, Linda Caprera could not be with us today. She had another commitment, but Peter Gore, Executive VP, and Ben Gilman, who is our staff attorney plus president of our foundation and also follows a number of bills in the legislature with various committees, are with us to talk about it. Let's first talk about the supplemental budget, because that is up for consideration for sure tomorrow, Veto Day. This is how I would provide the context for this discussion. You recall that the governor presented to the Appropriations Committee a supplemental budget. It was the budget that would actually, as the word implies, supplement that budget that was passed in late March of $8.3 billion. The supplemental budget that she presented was around $500 million. And she gave that to the appropriations to work their magic and to come up with a solution. The only reason I really focus on the majority budget, in addition to kind of set the stage for the amount of dollars we're talking about, is that you recall that in what most of us would describe as really unprecedented. Yes, there have been a couple occasions when budgets have been passed by the legislature with a majority vote, but it's unusual. It's usually a 2/3 vote. Usually both sides have a lot to say about the outcome. In this case, it wasn't the case. In this case, it was a majority budget. So how was that going to fare when the appropriations looked at the supplemental budget and tried to come up with a solution to add to that $8.3 billion? Well, they did. They reached a compromise, and we're going to talk about what's in that compromise. Ben, I'm going to hand this off to you. Give us your impression, your opinion about the significance of the accomplishment, but also what was in that budget, because truly there were some significant issues that helped move the economy forward or pay back debt that is probably owed to various parties as a result of some budget cuts of the past.
Thanks, Dan. And I think that context is very important, as we look at this budget that, is truly a compromised budget. And it appears came unanimous out of the Appropriations Committee, because a lot of us, as you spoke of earlier, when we saw the majority budget passed earlier this year, the 8.3 billion, we didn't necessarily see when the supplemental budget of 8.8 billion being proposed was going to reach that 2/3 of agreement or unanimous, support in the Appropriations Committee. But then, on last Sunday evening, the white smoke appeared, so to speak, as a signal that it appeared that there was an agreement and there was a true compromise that came out. And when you look at it, it's an $8.5 billion budget that started out as a proposal, 8.8 billion. And if you look within that, contained within that, there's some huge achievements in there that were done that hopefully will get unanimous support of the legislature. Whether it be the achieving 55% funding of education that's contained within that budget. Whether it be looking at another true compromise within that budget was looking at some tax relief. The Republicans were pushing for a income tax deduction of $10,200, which was a $300 million ticket item. At the end of the day, there was a compromise of a $300 payment to those that worked throughout the pandemic that was worth about $150 million in that budget. I think everyone saw funding municipal revenue sharing as a key aspect. You'll see a lot of property tax relief in this budget that I think help get the ball across the goal line. Fully funding the homestead exemption. There are a lot of compromises made throughout this budget, but at the end of the day, if you look at it, and it came out unanimous, which if you look at, Maine's Appropriations Committee, some of us were questioning whether or not that could happen. It was almost, you look at the issues, cut down the middle, each side did a little give and take on both ends of it. And then fold that into the next, chapter in this story is going to be the $1.1 billion LD 1733 that they're going to deal with on the veto day when they come back. But those are some of the high level ones in terms of when you look at it, in terms of the $300 payment, the 55% for education, homestead exemption, fully funding revenue sharing for municipalities. That's going to hit the bottom line of a lot of Maine families of property tax relief, which obviously is a concern here in the state of Maine, and education as well, supporting K-12 education throughout the state. So that's essentially from top level that's in that budget. They also did some stuff around direct care workers funding. That's been an issue for the last few years, funding them at 125% of the state's minimum wage. There's been several bills over, the last, as far back as I can remember, looking at direct care workers and how we compensate them, because a lot of that's done through the state budget. So dealing with that issue as well was a key piece to it. So those are some of the highlights with it. And then as we look forward in terms of the $1.1 billion American Rescue Plan funds that are going to be dealt with, I think we're going to see the next level of supporting workforce development, programs here in the state of Maine as well.
Thanks, Ben. Pete, I want to ask you about what you see addressed. And let me put that into context. Last week when we had this program, we talked about how the legislature had left on that Thursday night, early Friday morning, and in the process, a number of bills that had not been totally addressed. It was, to use the term we always use, it was unfinished business, but that appeared to be something that would be taken up on veto day, in addition to the vetoes, in addition to the supplemental budget, in addition to America's Rescue Plan that Ben just hinted at, and plus the bills that end up on appropriations table that have a fiscal note. There was a lot to do. We anticipated that it would take more than one day to do it. But now, a day before the actual veto day, what do you see for work that will be done, and possibly how we dispose of dispose, a bad choice of words, but how do we address all of those issues that appear to be necessary to deal with tomorrow and the next day?
So let me try and break it down into sections. I did have a conversation with the speaker over the weekend, and he indicated, much to my surprise, that there were only about 20 bills that were actually between the two bodies remaining for that remaining for them to deal with when they come in on Wednesday. That does not include the bills that are currently on the table. And I think we would consider that unfinished business. And some of those bills are bills we would prefer never came off the table. Some of those may be funded. Each caucus will get a set amount of money to spend to fund items off the table. And they'll have to pick and choose what their priorities. It forces individual legislators and caucuses to prioritize the items that are on the table. And there are always games that are played where fiscal notes are stripped off and people say you have to do this within existing resources. So it'll be interesting to see, but my understanding is they're not going to run the table, at least until the budget is passed. And once that's done, Appropriations Committee will meet. They'll go through the table, fund their items, and anything that comes off the table that the governor might not approve of, they would have to come back in 10 days for, lack of a better term, son of veto day, and deal with any new vetoes she may have. They could also wait until January if they wanted to take those items up. But my understanding is that they will plan for a son of veto day sometime around the 13th of July. And at that time, they'll also finalize the funding for the America's Rescue Plan's monies, the $1 billion that the state has. At the same time, tomorrow, after all the harmony around passage of a unanimous supplemental budget, they're going to have to take up vetoes. And as of right now, there are 11 vetoes that the governor has issued. And today is the deadline for some additional bills. And then tomorrow is a deadline for additional vetoes. So you could have more than just 11. There are 4 that are of greatest, I think, interest to us as an organization and our members. LD 920 would place a consumer fee on screening services and additional regulations in order to fund local access channels. That means your streaming services like HBO, Paramount Plus, Prime, you'd all have to pay an additional fee on that. The governor vetoed that bill for that reason. LD 194 would forbid campaign contributions from foreign, a corporation in Maine that was foreign owned. In other words, had up to a 10% interest in that. In a very strongly worded veto statement, she said it's offensive to the democratic process and vetoed the bill. LD 1418 is the gradual repeal of the real estate transfer tax. She vetoed that bill for 2 reasons. First, because it's an increase in taxes and she's pledged not to do that. And secondly, because the money goes to the home fund and the home fund is used for affordable housing. And in this case, the home fund is fully funded and the amount of money that would go to it, she believes would not justify the damage that was done on the reputation of the state for raising taxes. And then lastly, what I think will probably engender the most debate is a bill that we don't have anything to do with, but I happened to be in the chamber when they debated it. And that was 1668. And that requires the state, and specifically the Department of Corrections, to come up with a plan to close Long Creek Youth Development Center. And that is where the state puts juvenile offenders of a variety of different levels, including dangerous juvenile offenders. And she's vetoing that bill basically because there's no plan to deal with dangerous juvenile offenders and no place for them to go if there isn't Long Creek. But this was a very long and very contentious debate. And since the bill was debated extensively before, I expect the veto to be equally debated. And I guess I'd add one more thing so people understand who are watching. When a bill is vetoed, it can be overcome and can go into law over the objections of the governor, but only if that veto is objected to by 2/3 of both bodies. So even if a veto is overridden in the Senate, for example, it goes to the House and they fail to get 2/3 in the House, the veto is sustained. So it's a high bar to overcome a gubernatorial veto.
Thanks, Pete, and thanks to both of you. Very timely information, very important information, and with it, a lot of significant impacts that can go either way. So tomorrow is going to be a very important day. But as Peter said, it's not the end of the story. We do have the Son of Veto Day, and that too, probably on July 13th, will be another important day. So stay tuned. But before we leave this, because of what I consider to be almost unprecedented, of course it's not, but the significance of it leaves you with that impression, is a real expression of appreciation goes out to our Appropriations Committee, because the outcome was significant. It came about as a result of a compromise and, frankly, good work, and thank you for that work. So now let's turn in the next couple of minutes and give me the opportunity on behalf of the State Chamber, and certainly the advocacy team that you've seen today, as well as over the past several Maine Take, I should say, of our program, and that is Mal Leary, who has been a journalist for probably close to 50 years, is retiring this Friday. Mal brings with him an experience that many would envy and most would be untouched, because he has been in the heart of things at our state capitol. Many of us have worked with him. Many of us have been on the opposite end of some of those interviews, and they can be tough because he is very well researched. He knows his issues, and he's not afraid to ask you those tough questions. But that's what made him so special over these years. He had his own business for a while, Capital Service, that he provided news to both radio and print. He now works for Maine Public System and has been a reporter there for some time, giving us the latest news on a very popular station that we all have a tendency to listen to. Very fair, very balanced, but I also can tell you personally, as a Commissioner of Transportation, or also in the current position that I hold, that when you saw him at the State House and the Capitol, and he was walking towards me with his recorder and the microphone that he always carried with him, and I saw him head in my direction, there was a moment of anxiety, because, like I said a moment ago, he was always well researched, and he was always knowledgeable about the things that he was going to ask you. And as a person that really looked for openness in government, transparency, and he stood out in his leadership in that area, he was one to be reckoned with. But you know, as inadequate as I always felt after every interview I had with him, he was always the pro that we have come to know. He was always the one that gave you the benefit of the doubt, that represented your opinion fairly and responsibly, and we are all very grateful for that. Mal, you're going to be missed. I know you don't live very far from the Capitol, and you can probably see it from there, but certainly you will be missed, and I've got to believe that that pen, that skill, that typewriter, or that computer that served you so well over the years will continue to serve you in the future. It may not be in the same reporting from the Capitol, but I'll bet it'll still be reporting in some form. So Mal, we wish you nothing but the very best. And we appreciate the relationship that we have and the information that you have provided us and the public over these years. Good luck, my friend, and take care. Let's talk about the takeaway for this week, a significant one, and certainly one that I guess I would classify by two words: appreciation and results. Why do I say that? Because I think the show today gave us reason to say that. The guest reminded us of why we live in Maine, why we have something very special, very unique here in Maine, and why we should appreciate it, to never take it for granted, and don't assume that what you saw today with Senator Collins or with the appropriations in the time that we're in, when controversy and complex issues rule, don't assume it's like the benefit, the results, the success that you were witness to today. That's not the case. Because I ask you to think about this. Where but in Maine could you hold an event like we did with a fly-in, and to have all of your delegation, in our case, 2 representatives, 2 senators, available to us, accessible to us, engaged with us. They weren't recorded in advance. They didn't delegate it to a staff. They were there to engage with us, to allow us to ask tough questions, to interact with them. Not many states can say that, if any. And when you add to that the effect that Senator Collins had on us, both in terms of the expression of leadership as being part of that 10, but also being asked to meet with the president at that very last moment and have to leave our event. She left with apology, but not before offering us the opportunity to meet with us as you just witnessed on Monday. She didn't have to do that, but she did it. And you know what? That recording that you just heard of her presentation tells us so much about the person, her service, her commitment, and her leadership. Thank you, Senator Collins. Back here at home, we saw something very special as well. This has been a tough session. Access has not been readily available. Partisanship was pretty present for a good part of this session, if not most of the session. And yet, the Appropriations Committee on Sunday, as we heard, came to a unanimous agreement. Unanimous means it was bipartisan. They were handed a $500 million supplemental budget that, as we mentioned, was to be added to the 8.3 if they'd have passed it. But they came up with 200 million. I may have said 1,000, I meant 200 million. They came up with 200 million to present to the full legislature tomorrow. That's pretty darn significant, particularly when you consider that in late March, it was a majority budget, an unusual vote, and one that probably could have poisoned the well, so to speak. It certainly would have affected the remaining issues, but it didn't in this case, not at all. Instead, the appropriations came together, they worked together, and they found a compromise. They gave a little to get a lot, is how I see it. And the result, a unanimous report to the full body. That's encouraging because it may allow us to have a 2/3 vote, which puts it into effect immediately rather than have to wait the 90 days after adjournment if it's a majority vote. Yeah, it's good stuff. But also with that, there came some pretty darn significant benefits to the public. And you heard Ben speak to them. Education funding at 55%, revenue sharing back to 5% of personal and sales income tax, and homestead back to 100%. We heard about how the direct care workers reimbursement rate would be increased to 125% of the minimum wage. And yes, the nursing homes were also benefited by this. And for those who work during it, if you met that 75,000 filing as an individual or 150,000 as a couple or a joint filing, you were entitled to the $300. All of that was in the interest of trying to do what mattered in our economy and to do it together. How good was that? I would argue it's very good. And I want to thank the Appropriations for not only what you accomplished, but clearly the way you accomplished it. And I have to also, I want to be sure to circle back and say how grateful we've all been, as I tried to express a moment ago, to Mal O'Leary for his nearly 50 years of service. It really has made a difference. Information is a beautiful thing because it helps you make those decisions that are important, that are necessary, and are the best possible outcome. In all of that, throughout the program today, there is something truly special about the people, but also people working together to make a difference. The results themselves speak the success of those efforts. It's uplifting, it's encouraging, it's good to hear, it actually helps our economy. But I guess the question is, as good as those results are, as positive as they are, do we do enough to state our words of appreciation or to share those words that have meaning to those who work so hard? I think the case is that we often think about it, but we seldom do it. We seldom say thank you. In a world where you can be anything, it's important to be kind. And I would add the words, also be appreciative. That is the main take for this week. I do want to remind you that we will not be on next week, as we will be taking that week off on vacation. I will be back on the 13th, on Tuesday, same time, talking about people making a difference as well as the issues that they represent. In the meantime, have a wonderful 4th. We look forward to seeing you back here on the 13th. And remember this, take care of yourself, but also take care of one another. That's it for this week. Thanks. Take care.